been saying this for months and for months and for years. It is by design for Republicans to keep doing what they're doing to suppress the vote, to shave off voters here. It makes no sense. We saw what Chris Kobach in Kansas was doing with cross-check, where they were eliminating people in Michigan because they say a same name person was registered in another state, knowing full well it's two different people. And I don't understand why national Republicans are not calling out their own party for what they're doing. It is despicable. We have to deal with this every election.
Well, you know, Roland, this happens, to your point, every single election. Before I answer that, though, I want to point out that Waller County, Texas, is also the place where Sandra Bland died. And so we know that there are continuous patterns and practices of disenfranchisement, of abuse, and of oppression all across the South and all across this nation. But especially when we look at places like Texas and Georgia and Florida, it is high time for our voices to finally be heard. So when I saw what was happening in Georgia, when so many of us saw what was happening in Georgia, we sounded the alarm. We wanted to make sure that people knew what their rights were. And I'm so thankful that you're talking about this. But I actually want to look at what voter suppression is looking like in Florida, because to your point, this is happening all over the country. And there's a difference between voter suppression and voter disenfranchisement. Voter suppression are all of these covert ways in which barriers and obstacles are created. So people are purged from voter rolls, they're given misleading information, they're told that they're registered, and then they show up and they find out that they aren't. All of the kinds of things we've been talking about thus far. Voter disenfranchisement is when the law actually denies you from being able to vote. And 1.4 million Floridians and 5.3 million people across this country are disenfranchised from their right to vote simply because they are formerly convicted felons. They've served their debt to society, and when they come back and return to society, they still are not allowed to engage as full citizens. The online voter registration form in Florida was mysteriously acting up on the final day of voter registration in Florida. So we know that in places like Florida and all across the country, if the vote is continuously suppressed, not only will we see the kinds of candidates that we don't want to have elected be elected, we'll also see the very people who need those voters to show up to restore voting rights to this disenfranchised continue to be denied.
Brandon, I'm still look. You know me, Brandon. I've been asking for this for the longest, and I still don't understand why a group of Black Republicans have not come together as a group to call out the party's constant voter suppression. I told you what's happening in Georgia. In Missouri, a federal judge had to slap down the Missouri Secretary of State who put out a lying ad telling people they had to bring their ID to vote. They didn't. He was lying. And so I just don't understand that Republicans keep doing this and Black Republicans don't say nothing as a group.
Yeah, you're right, Roland. We talk about this often. I want to make sure it's very clear, as my colleague was talking about earlier. The right to vote is sacred, and I don't want to make it sure it's very clear that I do not support any attempt to disenfranchise or suppress the vote. But going back to the topic that we talked about all day, which is going on in Georgia, I think we need to take a step back, and I understand that there's an election coming up, and I think a large part of this narrative is an effort, political games, to kind of gin up turnout vote. If you look at what's happened over Georgia over the last since 2006, registration votes for African Americans up 44%. Registration votes for Hispanics up 67%. Up for whites is only 12%. This year, there's a record number of voters registered in Georgia that broke all-time records. They have now, you can register online by going on the website 24 hours a day up until the deadline, which was just passed, to register to vote. So this idea that Republican Kemp or the previous Secretary of State in Georgia is somehow trying to stop blacks and minorities from registering to vote is clearly disproven by the facts that we have record increases in voter registration of blacks and Hispanics over the last couple of years. Going forward to what's going on right now, you're asking about the exact match, which again, I'm not a particular fan of. I work here in Maryland politics. They have a similar program here, and that's controlled by Democrats here in Maryland, where that if your address is messed up or your social security number is messed up, you're purged from, you're placed in a temporary holding position. And so I know you focus.
No, one second, Brandon. Brandon,
yes, sir.
You just said,
yeah.
Brandon, this is what you just said.
Yep.
You just said that if your address or your social security number is messed up. That's not what they're doing in Georgia. In Georgia, they are literally saying if a period or an apostrophe, or even if, okay, so if I did Roland Martin, and there's another document that says Roland S. Martin, Their deal is, we're taking that out.
I'm familiar with that. Now,
That's
again,
totally different. Now, an address and a social security number, that's different than an apostrophe or a period, bro.
Let me correct you where you're wrong, Roland. The 53,000 votes that are currently on hold, some of those are because the addresses are different, some of those because Social Security, and yes, to your point, some of those are also because the name is different. And I agree with you, that is horribly wrong. I was talking to a Democrat in my county just last week. There's a similar policy here in Maryland when you're trying to petition to get on the ballot. If your name is different, if their apostrophe or hyphen is different, they will not count your name as far as petition. Now, that's a little bit different. It's not voter registration, but back to your point about going in Georgia, some of those 53,000 are Social Security numbers and addresses. All those are not the hyphen. So I agree with you. That's horrible and it's wrong. Let me say one more last thing before you go.
But the problem in Georgia, here's my problem in Georgia. You have a Secretary of State who's been slapped down, who it was wrong what he did. And it's like, okay, we're going to go back and we're going to continue to do it. And so this is a pattern. This isn't, hey, we made a mistake one time. This is a deliberate attempt by Brian Kemp to keep folks from voting.
Let me just go end with this right quick, Roland. Keep saying that it's Brian Kemp, and you know it's factual. I like to talk about facts. The 53,000 votes in Georgia, not a single one of them were flagged by Brian Kemp. They were flagged by the County Board of Elections, including some hundreds of them from Fulton County, which you know is a black majority and Democrat-controlled county. It is the local boards of elections that are flagging them in accordance with the state law that was passed by a Republican legislator. But I'll make it very clear also, I agree with Stacey when she says that Kemp needs to. I agree the Republicans did, but I agree with Stacey that Brian Kemp should resign.
Don't try to run past that.
No, I'm not trying to run past that.
It's not just the state Republicans, right? It is the Secretary of State. In every single state, the Secretary of State is in control of elections. The local boards of elections are not going to do that which the Secretary of State has not pushed them to do. So to act as though those two things are completely disconnected is fallacious.
So
and on top of that, what you also said was that because registrations are high, somehow Brian Kemp must not actually be deliberately going out there and trying to stop the African American vote. Black people have been triumphant over things that have been pushed on us for centuries. So the idea that we somehow made it through doesn't negate the fact that Brian Kemp is doing exactly what we're saying he's doing.
Ray Baker, thank you. That's why I was going to bring that point up. Because black people, we say, fine, you got a hurdle, we going to jump over the hurdle. Oh, the hurdle was 2 feet, we jumped over it. Oh, you raised it to 4 feet? All right, we're going to go back and practice, and we're going to come back and jump 4 feet. Oh, now you want to move it to 8 feet. We're going to go back and practice and jump over 8 feet. But the point, Brandon, that I want Ray to speak to is you keep putting damn hurdles up.
Absolutely. Real quick, Roland. Absolutely. Real quick, Roland. Brandon, the song is called We Shall Overcome, right? That means that when people try to do things that stop us, we are able to successfully overcome those things and push forward for our full rights of humanity and citizenship. On another point of this question, you say it as though Brian Kemp is elevating the voter registration rolls for African Americans. He is not. As Brittany so clearly laid out, we are doing so despite him, not because of him. Finally, we have to ask this question. How come time and time again, when we see voter suppression laws that will overwhelmingly and undoubtedly affect African Americans, it happens to be Republicans? Lastly, Mr. Kemp would not even recuse himself. Chris Kobach of President Trump's fraudulent and erroneous voter integrity panel, I believe they were calling it, even begrudgingly agreed to recuse himself. If Chris Kobach will recuse himself, what makes Brian Kemp so good not to recuse himself? There's so many questions that almost come down to make this almost personal, because Ms. Abrams was in charge of a voter registration activity when she was the leader of the House Minority Caucus in Georgia that was specifically focused on increasing the number of young and minority voters. Now, when we saw that happens, she later recuses herself from that because, as she said in her evidence, in her commentary with Roland, that she did not want to have any improprieties, anything that looked wrong here. She stepped back. Yet, again, Mr. Kemp continues to attack African-American voters in ways that seems prejudicial at best. Lastly, I would draw your attention and the black Republicans' attention and Republicans who call themselves people of good faith attention to a piece in the Washington Post by Paul Waldman, which says, no, we cannot guarantee that GOP are racist. We cannot guarantee that Republicans are racist. But you do have to ask yourself, how come racists feel really comfortable hanging out with the Republicans?
And if I can just push back on some of the ways in accuracy.
Brandon, I got one question.
Okay, yeah.
Brandon, I just have one question.
I got you.
Just have one question.
Yeah.
Have you asked for Shannon Wright, who's with who's also part of Republican Party there in Maryland, Eugene? Have you hit up the black members of the Republican National Committee committeemen? Have you hit up Kay James? Have you hit up J.C. Watts? Have you hit up Michael Steele? Have you hit up a group of black Republicans and said, hey, we as black Republicans should stand together as one and tell our party enough with the voter suppression, enough with the games and the tactics? Have you, I'm not asking somebody else, I'm asking Brandon, because I asked you this last year as well. Have you done that? And if you have, what's been the response?
And two things. One, you asked me this last year, and I told you, yes, I did actually put a tweet out. And I don't know if it was about the exact topic or about another topic.
I just said tweet.
No, I mean a tweet I'm saying I've done it privately, but I also have an online record publicly that you can go look at where I tagged the individuals you just mentioned about coming together. I forget exactly what the topic was last year you asked me to do, but it was similar to this. And you can see the crickets that responded to it. But again, to that point, I think we disagree on the facts based of suppression.
Brandon, 1 second. Brandon, I'm going to let you make your other point.
Okay.
I just want to be clear.
Yes.
What you're saying is you privately have sent emails. Hold up. You privately have sent emails or text messages to a number of other black Republicans, including the people I mentioned, saying that we should come together to tell our party, stop suppressing the votes of people, especially people of color, and no one has responded to you? Is that what you're telling me?
No. Let me take it back again. I don't remember exactly what topic it was last year that I did it for, but again, we disagree on the premise of your statement, so of course I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do because we disagree on the whole premise that there is this coordinated effort.
So Brandon, you disagree on the premise that Republicans are deliberately trying to suppress the vote.
Yes, that the blanket statement. Again, I don't like Chris Kobach. That's one person I don't dislike. So what's going on in Kansas is a case-by-case basis. But going back to Georgia, which I know you want to keep diverting from, you keep on going away for Georgia. Okay.
So let me be clear.
Yes, sir.
Are you saying that the cross-check led by Chris Kobach is not voter suppression?
No, I'm saying I don't like Chris Kobach's activity. He's not. I disavow anything that Chris Kobach does. I go look in detail of it. But when you say Chris Kobach, my knee-jerk reaction is to reject what he does. I'm not a fan of Chris Kobach.
Are you saying that? What about when the North Carolina GOP was nailed by a federal judge for what federal judges saying they had a laser-like focus on targeting black voters? You disagree with that, or you agree with it?
No, I do not disagree. To an extent, they're trying to target Democrat voters, which obviously majority of them are black.
No.
It was based on Democrat.
No, Brandon. The federal judges in their statement said
I know that
was a laser-like focus on black voters.
I understand that.
They have emails of the North Carolina GOP specifically asking for data on when African Americans were voting in early voting.
And again, as I told you before, Roland, yes, when last year we brought this topic, I think actually it was the North Carolina case that we talked about. I do not agree with that case-by-case effort. You want to keep diverting from Georgia, which I understand you do, because it's a flimsy case.
No.
I don't agree. You are, because no. I say it again, Roland. I disagree with that law that was passed by North Carolina. I disagree with you. Let me finish. I disagree with your statement that it was somehow.
Disagree with the trend of your party that continues to disenfranchise voters and suppress votes all across this country. Roland's point is that he could keep going. He could list Missouri, he could list North Carolina, he could list Florida, he could list Texas, he could list Louisiana, he could list Pennsylvania. We can keep going. The point is, you want to narrow this conversation to a singular state because that makes it easier to prove your point.
No, it's the state that we're talking about today.
Argumentatively fallacious.
Let me know when I can go.
Because at the end of the day, this is a trend that we see across the country and have seen for decades. And now, let me be clear. Oppression and racism does not belong to a single party. I want to be very clear about that. However, voter suppression has continuously and consistently been pursued by the party that you belong to. So Roland's question is, are you willing to disavow that as much as you're willing to disavow Chris Kobach? And are you willing to actually stand up inside of your party and try to change that thing from the inside out? And I think that's a perfectly fair question.
Let me know when I can get back to my point. Let me know if I get to my point.
The question, then you can get
I got my 5 questions I answered. I've answered 5 questions.
Brandon, 1 second. Brandon, 1 second. You can answer Brittany, and then you can make your final comment before I go on to my next story.
All right, two things. One, the reason I'm focused on Georgia, because that's what the whole setup was about. But we won't talk about other states. We can talk about Maryland, where black voters are being disenfranchised, but not by the Republicans, but by Democrat Party leaders. We can talk about the NAACP stating as such, where they chop up black communities to put them into different districts to keep the Democrat hold. So that's an example. So you're right. It's not held by one party, but you want to talk about just the Republican Party. Talking about North Carolina, again, my point is this. I understand you want to make it into a narrative that you can use to gin up votes for your party, your favorite party. What I am saying is the effort in North Carolina, which I do not agree with, which if you brought on the National Committee woman from that state, she can speak to it more. I'm from Maryland, that's North Carolina. Their effort was to, again, unfairly, which I disagree with, attack the Democrat vote, which a large part of it is black voters. If black voters vote Republican, they will not be going after the black voters. So I want to make sure that's clear. It may be a nuance to you, but it's clear that it's a political game, which I do not agree with, but it was based on Democrat versus Republican and not the race baiting that you're trying to do. Lastly, I want to say on Georgia, which was the whole topic that you spent the first 20 minutes talking about, not a single voter in Georgia this coming election will be denied the right to vote. Not the 6.1 million who registered this year, a record number, or the 53,000 who were flagged because some of their information, whether the address, whether the social security number, or to your point, their name was not exactly the match. None of them will be denied the right to vote. Go out and vote. And I agree that some of these hurdles to voting need to be fixed. But I also think it's an honest duty for you as a journalist to be honest with your viewers, not to be so much fear-mongering that someone is trying to deny the right to vote when no one in Georgia will be denied the right to vote this coming election.
Do you honestly believe some of the things you're saying, Brandon? And the reason why I asked, do you honestly believe these things are because
facts, but it's called facts. None of the 50,000 votes will be denied. That's a fact. They have 2 years.
The reason why I asked, do you believe these things, Brandon?
It is less than 1% of the registered voters, which I agree is not insignificant, but it's less than 1% of registered voters have been flagged. A lot of them have been flagged in Democrat counties by Democrat Board of Elections in compliance with state law. And again, there's 2 years you have to provide the updated information so that's a match. I don't agree with the exact match. There's a provision in Maryland that has exact matches, but the law in Georgia says exact match, and you have 2 years from the point of election to correct it.
So let me do this here. I'm going to read, first of all, let me say again, this is what happens, Brandon, which is shameful and despicable, is when you are unwilling to consider and deal with reality.
Okay.
On July 29th, 2016, now if I was in the office, I would say, Henry, go to my iPad. This is the story right here from the New York Times. Headline, Federal Appeals Court strikes down North Carolina voter ID requirement. This is the lead. A federal appeals court decisively struck down North Carolina's voter identification law on Friday, saying its provisions deliberately, quote, target African Americans with almost surgical precision, unquote, in an effort to depress black turnout at the polls. The sweeping 83-page decision by a panel of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit upended voting procedures in a battleground state about 3 months before Election Day. They go on to say in the ruling, these are federal judges, quote, the evidence in this case casts doubt on the notion that voter ID laws foster integrity and confidence. The Wisconsin experience demonstrates that a preoccupation with mostly phantom election fraud leads to real incidents of disenfranchisement, which undermine rather than enhance confidence in elections. They say in here that, yes, the state's significant, shameful past discrimination had largely abated in the last 25 years. But they wrote that there was a link, quote, a link between race and politics in North Carolina. Do not, Brandon, come on this show and dare say it's about Democrats or Republicans when the federal judges had evidence, emails of Republicans specifically asking, when do black voters vote during early
yes,
elections.
And the intention
you
to
said
the
it wasn't about race.
I never said
it
it was
is
not
completely
about
race.
Never said it was about race. I said they're using race to depress, like you said, the black vote and the Democrat vote. I agreed. I disavowed North Carolina. So again, you're trying to change my words or twist my words however you said it.
No, I didn't.
I said
in
it last
fact,
year.
1 second.
I'm saying it
I'm
now.
going to read one more paragraph.
What North Carolina did last year. I'm not part of North Carolina GOP.
I'm going to read, Brandon, I'm going to read one more paragraph. This is from the federal judges. Quote, we cannot ignore the record evidence that because of race, the legislature enacted one of the largest restrictions of the franchise in modern North Carolina history. The court seems to do this.
I'm agreeing with you, Roland. We're agreeing on this issue.
But here's my point. Brandon, I asked you, have you and other black Republicans come out to publicly denounce the consistent voter suppression efforts of Republicans in multiple states, and you haven't answered?
I did answer it. I got to go back. And then let me say it again. I told you last year when you asked me to do this. I did it when it was called North Carolina. I didn't know what it exactly was, but it was North Carolina. Go back to your tweets and find out. I did it privately. I did it publicly.
So
I did it privately. I did it publicly. The crickets,
as a group,
the crickets are out there. I'm saying it right now myself as well. I know you don't want me to say it, but I'm saying it. I disavowed that. I said it last year.
Brandon, you have done that.
Okay,
Brandon,
thank you.
For the record,
make sure that's
you
clear.
Personally have disavowed that. But I'm specifically asking, why haven't black Republicans as a group come together to publicly in a news conference denounce the party's consistent effort for voter suppression? And that, to me, is critically important.